Hi there, this is Dormain Drewitz from VMware. Today we're talking about whether your developer experience is COVID immune. So what does that mean? First, we have to define some terms like developer experience, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But one thing that is often comes up is that developers are looking to be productive. They want to be able to get things done quickly. They want to be able to get feedback on their work quickly. They want to get to production quickly. And so a good developer experience is a productive developer experience. It's one where your code sees the light of day in a relatively timely fashion, and you can start to see the impact on your work on the world and in your business or the mission that you're working on. So let's take a look before we can really understand, is our developer experience COVID immune? What has the impact of COVID been, and what does it continue to be? I think something that, we've now been sheltering in place for many months. Here we are on June 10th when I'm recording this, and I've got a dashboard that you can go to at covid19.wavefront.com, which is actually currently visualizing a number of different data sources from around the world, showcasing, as you can see, cases, recoveries, mortality rates, and you can drill in by country, etc. And this is sort of telling us a story right now, which is that even though there's many other challenges currently pressing and weighing on our minds in the world, COVID remains very much an important topic, and one that we haven't seen the end of that story yet. The number of new confirmed cases per day continues to reach new peaks. And so that's something that this particular conversation around whether or not your developer experience is COVID immune isn't one that, we got through that one, maybe we're okay. Hopefully there's a lot of learnings that can come out of this. But an important theme here is that none of this was part of the plan. And this ties back to that developer experience when you think about how quickly are you able to get your code to production? How quickly are you able to see the impact of the work that you're doing? That can be affected by how you plan and how you execute those plans. But COVID was not part of anyone's plan. Everyone was caught by surprise, and yet everyone has had to deal with it. And this has really demonstrated folks who have been well prepared to handle it, as well as folks that are really struggling to be able to adapt and change because this was not part of the plan. Just to sort of talk about how this is beyond just an individual and a consumer experience. Something in healthcare, of course, ICU bed capacity, ventilator capacity, how healthcare workers are able to be protected and remain safe doing their work on the front lines, how patients get information and get healthcare even in the face of a global pandemic. Looking at financial services and the economy, the economic impact, none of this was part of the plan. And so there's been a rapid response to the economic impact of the global pandemic. Retail, particularly essential retail, has been something that's had immediate impact from COVID, and suddenly the way that those businesses have had to engage customers shifting on a dime. And then, of course, governments that bear some responsibility to both provide the shutdown as well as safely reopen public services and spaces. That's, again, none of this was part of the plan, and yet everyone has had to adapt or try to adapt. Of course, just as individuals working from home with their children, not in school. Again, this was definitely not part of the plan. But here we are, we're all trying to adapt and make the best of it. But that adaptation can be really hard depending on how you were going about things before. And if we look at software and how software is getting developed, if the planning looks like this, which is to take an example from actually a talk given at conference, CF Summit, a couple years ago in Boston, the team from the Air Force was sharing what they were dealing with before they really began on their own digital transformation. This was what it looked like to get through the procurement process and planning and implementation process of building new software. pretty mind-blowing in terms of its complexity and very, very slow, as you can imagine. And so this is hopefully not the planning process that any of you listening to this were dealing with, but maybe there's some familiarity in terms of some level of friction that exists in being able to change plans as the situation changes around you. And that's very much what we're dealing with. Now, something that has actually been proven through a lot of extensive research from the DORA group is that the organizations that are able to deploy code more frequently, have a faster lead time from commit to deploy, are also the same ones that are able to recover from incidents, fewer change failure rates, and have a higher association with their overall business performance. So we already know that delivering software faster and more frequently to production is something that is an indicator of a really healthy, elite performing software organization. But what does that mean in terms of planning? That sort of reflects back on their ability to adapt those plans and the overall developer experience that their software engineers have. So what we also know is looking at other survey work out there is that most folks are not on a super frequent release schedule. A lot of folks are still looking at that quarterly or longer release timeline for new applications. And if you think about it, here we are on June 10th. We haven't quite hit 3 months since the shelter-in-place orders came out in my particular jurisdiction, for example. And so that means that you'd have one release in this entire time frame, and that is probably not enough to be able to really adapt your software to the very dynamic and changing environment and new information that has been coming out on a week-by-week basis. A quarter ago, we didn't know as much as we know now about not only the COVID disease itself, but the economic impact, the retailing impact, and the civilian impact. And so this is still the reality that most people are dealing with. It begs the question, how quickly can you change your plan? That is a litmus test for the developer experience that you have. So let's take a look at some folks that have been able to adapt quickly. So use some of these as some examples and some lessons learned to sort of share out and see what can we do to continue to be able to turn on a dime as we face continued uncertainty with the remaining presence of COVID in our lives and the unabating pace at which new cases are coming to light. So in healthcare, just an example of a healthcare organization that was able to go from idea to production in 72 hours in order to be able to visualize capacity for various healthcare resources. And so some of the things that coming down to the developer experience, how are they able to do this quickly, needing to be able to get a public URL to be able to publish that visualization, making sure that that visualization can scale when there's an expected spike in terms of the traffic and interest that's going to come to this visualization application. And of course, making sure you have a robust CI/CD pipeline so that future changes to that application can happen very seamlessly. And of course, all of this needed to happen in 72 hours. That was the new plan, and so that was factoring in things that were coming in from other parts of the organization, not just an arbitrary timeline from the software team, but teams that were preparing to provide the communications air cover to go along with this new application to make people aware of it. They needed timelines that they could work within. So that's one example. Another one, looking more on the economic side. So in financial services, being able to respond quickly to economic stimulus programs. Another case where folks were able to go from idea to production in 8 days. And here, being able to expose new APIs to existing systems were critical to being able to bring this new application experience, making sure that that was going to be able to scale, knowing that there's a lot of demand in terms of being able to make use of these economic stimulus programs, and making sure that those incremental changes were part of the new plan, knowing that the first version that goes out the door in 8 days was not going to be the long-term version that was available, that things were going to iterate. And so all of this has to happen responding to arbitrary timelines coming from external sources like legislation bodies that are the ones passing these new stimulus programs. And that becomes the new timeline under which a financial services company has to be able to respond in order to support their customers and constituents. Another example, looking at essential retail, as you can imagine, a lot of folks suddenly shifting to online shopping for things like groceries, which may not have been really part of how they did their grocery shopping. And so essential retailers needing to be able to handle 100x the orders per day on their e-commerce systems, 10x the e-commerce traffic, and that, of course, generating 2 to 3x the log volume in order to be able to track what is going on with these applications, and being able to do all of this without any lead time to do load testing, just needing to know that the system will just work and can handle it. In addition to, essential retailers wanting to be able to introduce new experiences like buy online, pick up at curbside, to be able to manage how folks are able to transact with them while also remaining safe and manage the overall presence of folks inside their stores. So all of these new experiences, or being able to scale existing experiences and iterate those online experiences for essential retailers, has also been critical. And we're seeing examples of folks who've been able to turn on that dime. And then, of course, finally, government agencies thinking about how do they safely shut down and reopen public spaces and public services. Examples here are government entities, now finding themselves responsible for building completely new applications from scratch. And so this case, government agency prototyping a contact tracing application in 24 hours and then moving into a larger scale beta, talking about a net new application that needs to be able to scale to millions of users over time while also maintaining the utmost in citizen privacy. That the developers working on that need to be able to make sure that they can iterate quickly as new scientific discoveries come onto the scene and suddenly change what they need to be building for this application. And of course, other things like making sure that they're able to consider factors such as the mobile device power management of their application, and other concerns that come up, and integration into existing government databases, or being able to prepare to scale for completely new data sets that come in. So all of these examples have certain things in common. And those come back to frequent changes to the software, being able to iterate, so not relying on a big upfront plan. None of this was part of anyone's plan. And at this point, while folks would love to have more concrete plans, the plan to change is the plan. And so being able to make those frequent changes is something that is a critical factor in success to make sure your developer experience is COVID immune. The second thing is making sure that scalability is something that doesn't incur a lot of overhead for developers, making sure that the scaling just works so that developers can focus on delivering those new features and those new digital experiences to citizens, to consumers, and that the scaling just works. That's something that is really critical to that COVID immune developer experience. And then, of course, thinking about the complete path to production being very streamlined that supports those frequent changes. And there's some underlying pieces that go in that. Cloud Foundry was used in all of the examples that I talked about and has been a critical part of the technology approach to it. But it goes beyond just technology. There's changes to people and process and the ways that developers are working, the architectures and the patterns that the applications are being built in that need to go hand in hand with those underlying technology components in order to create this COVID immune developer experience. And so those are some of the things that I'll get into, but I just want to reiterate that we're sort of in this state now where we're getting used to some of the changes, but there still remains a lot of uncertainty ahead. And the ability to change plans quickly is going to remain a valuable asset for any organization. And so thinking about, is our developer experience one that supports frequent changes? How quickly can we make changes to our plans and then have developers experiment and iterate within that as new information comes to light? That becomes the new test of, does our developer experience support this type of environment? Can it support change? And there's a couple of things I mentioned beyond simply technologies. Cloud Foundry, of course, has been one that and you saw in the examples, is really helped a lot of organizations on the technical side by abstracting away the code from underlying infrastructure so that infrastructure can scale independently, really solving those scalability challenges, really providing a lot of self-service for those developers to be able to make changes and access new resources very quickly. But there's more to do. And so this is a set of things that I've looked at in terms of thinking about that friction to change and how to reduce that is really, the focus of when you want to have a tech debt conversation. That is you're not really paying down the principal. You want to reduce that interest rate. That is that friction to change is the interest rate measure of that technical debt. And what are some of the things that people can do to address that? Things like test coverage, test-driven development, being a practice to get there, but ultimately getting to the point where you have the tests in place, however you want to get to that point, but you have the tests in place so that when you make changes, you're able to do so confidently, knowing that it's not going to break things. That goes hand in hand with adopting continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines so that in addition to those tests, other steps that need to happen in order to be able to deliver the software are fully automated so that that can happen very frequently without a lot of overhead. Something else that's critically important, and speaking with some of the industry analysts that are talking frequently with customers during this time, those that have been succeeding are the ones that engaged security and compliance early and often, both in the past and throughout this time. And so thinking about, there are practices and there are technologies that help bring that security lens and those security questions earlier in the software development lifecycle. And so there are some tools like Sneak and Contrast Security that work well to be able to get those concerns addressed earlier to make sure that those changes can happen in a more frictionless way. Microservices architectures, thinking about those scalability questions, being able to scale things more independently can really, really help make sure that the scaling just works. And so having those architectural approaches and taking the time to decouple things that need to scale at different rates so that you can meet these sudden surges in scaling events that occur. And certainly that folks have seen. And then finally is thinking through that entire path to production and beyond just, we talked about security and compliance. That's a big part of it, that being baked into that path to production. Continuous integration and continuous delivery, certainly part of it. But really the path to production conversation needs to involve ownership and folks who really think about that entire process and take ownership of making it something that is more automated. And so there's some great resources and discussions out there about how to go about that process so that developers ultimately have a great experience of getting to production quickly. And there's really a team to rely on to handle that overall end-to-end experience. So thank you for your time. Hopefully this has been useful and stay safe out there.